Well, how much do you watch the news at your age? I certainly got the news. There was enough important things happening going on, but clearly it does. It's your primary source of information outside of the people that are around you. My father was employed by the military, so it didn't really affect him either. The military was relatively stable, employer since we were in the middle of the Vietnam War. My mother had to start working in order to make a little extra money, since the allotment checks that were coming from him came kind of irregularly, bureaucracy being what it is. Well, again, I was relatively young. There was a major rift. There was a major anti-war sentiment among young people. I was a little too young to be involved in it, but it certainly still trickled into the high schools and the junior highs, mostly by way of music and artistic expression and such. I did live in California at the time, so it was one of the major hotbeds of activity. However, I was also in a military family, which was not particularly tolerant of those messages. So I belonged to more of a military sort of community at some points in time. I lived on Okinawa for a year and a half in the midst of the Vietnam War. My father went to Vietnam 3 times, so I was without my father for quite a long period of time during my youth. The community, kind of went on. There were those people who weren't involved. Certainly, it was always kind of hanging in the air. Relatively young people particularly males, were concerned about the draft. Again, I was a little too young to be caught up in it. I wasn't of draftable age. I'm sure my parents were concerned that, there was always the chance that we might, they had 4 sons, they might be dragged into it. But, on a day-to-day basis, it was something you heard about on the news. My father wasn't home a lot as a result, and I'm sure my mother, as well as us, were concerned that he might not come home. He lost a lot of friends. By the time he went to his 3rd tour of duty, he was kind of not in the front lines. He was working in maintenance and engineering and such, and so, and he was a relatively higher rank, so, there was less concern, I guess, that something bad would happen. But it kept him away from home. We didn't really see him regularly until he retired from the Marine Corps. It was an abstraction to me. It was clearly something that divided our family. That obviously not good. The message that reached the young people, was clearly against the war. But at the same time, I had maybe a more balanced sort of exposure to it, because I actually had a family that was invested in it. My father was there, and so it's not the kind of thing you can be completely abstract about, where you can stand at arm's length and criticize it because you've got no skin in the game. Well, I think the whole national sentiment swung to the side that the war was wrong. We shouldn't have been as involved as we were. But at the same time, I think that the issues surrounding the anti-war sentiment was that the rejection of the soldiers who were sent there. People weren't able to discriminate, the war from the people who were sent there. They didn't make the judgment to do it. They did it out of patriotism or responsibility, legal or otherwise. And they were not treated as well as they could have been. They weren't given the respect that they deserved. Now we hold our veterans in much higher esteem. The lesson that came back from Vietnam is that you really don't treat your veterans that way. They aren't to be held responsible for it. It's the leadership that really is, and everything's always in hindsight in terms of judging whether it was right or wrong. The broader sentiment was that, obviously, that it was wrong. But again, the parts, that criticized the military to the level of the individual personnel and such, that was a wrong sort of position to take at the national level. I think it made the nation mature. Well, the long term is that I think that a more honest understanding of our government, it was certainly divisive, but people kind of came together, in a critical way. There's still those who would say it was justifiable and it was necessary, and to hell with anybody who doesn't believe that we were doing the right thing. It was an unnecessary sort of thing in a lot of people's minds. And I think that seems to be the broader, sense, is that there were other ways to deal with the problem, perhaps. I can't say what the genuine truth is there, but I think one of the things that came out of it was a much better understanding that the people had to interact more with the government. They had to. They couldn't be passive about it. They couldn't just let the government take them down whatever road that the leadership wanted. Is that now they realized they had a stake in the game. They had a voice. A lot of things were changing in tandem with the Vietnam War. The civil rights, racial expression, and such. All of these things were kind of coming to the head at the same time. And it was recognition of a lot of social issues. You come to a great many realizations about yourself as a nation, and then and hopefully come to some clarity about things. In some ways, things are still confused, but I think people have a much more honest appraisal now of what their government is, the U.S. government is, and the kinds of things that can happen if you're not vigilant and not interacting, not voting, not doing what needs to be done in order to have a voice. It changed everything. It changed entertainment. It changed, I think, your understanding of the world because of the information that's available to you. Oh, absolutely. For any teenager, the culture that they grow up in is the pop culture, whatever is popular at that time. They're not getting the information from the same sources that their parents are getting the information. Yeah, the pop culture, well, and maybe everybody can assert this. I would, lay claim that the pop culture of the 60s and the 70s, because it was so dynamic, and it was a time of change and very socially charged, that it was probably one of the more important periods of popular culture in American history, at least. Things that are happening now are either echoed or echoing what happened in that era of my youth, or are the offspring of those things.